Amy, are you able to hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you are. Okay, we're good, lady. Conference room, we're okay. We got to figure it out. Thank you so much, though.
I can hear.
Okay, so I am going to go ahead and get started. And who I am is Jennifer May. I work with Spirit of Faith Adoptions. We are a nonprofit Christian adoption agency in the state of Ohio. So we're all over Ohio. I know you guys are in West Virginia, so we're pretty close, but not the same state. So the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is going to be completely relevant to Ohio when the mamas work with us in Ohio. But any of this information that has to do with laws, you can very easily find on your own state's equivalent of JFS, Job and Family Services. So just to give you a little bit of heads up on that. So today we're going to talk about the importance of understanding the policies around adoption. Again, each state's going to be a little bit different, but overall they're going to be pretty similar. We're going to talk about the cultural biases. I'm sure many of you ladies have heard, oh, I could never place for adoption. Well, let's get to the root of that. Where is that coming from? To kind of help build that confidence in us and to be able to give these women accurate and whole information, even if they give us a little bit of pushback, with still being empathetic to their thoughts, feelings, and desires, but just understanding the cultural biases that they might be bringing into the office. And then to help build empathy for these people. I myself am a birth mom. 17 years ago, I placed my child for adoption. So I want to pour my unique perspective into the situation so that you can understand that these women are so much more than the surface of their expanding bellies. I am also a published author on my story. And I do a lot of speaking on ethical adoptions. That's something I'm very passionate about. So another thing that we're going to touch on is how to recognize an ethical agency. So if you had a gal that was not going to deliver in the state of Ohio, which would be the only way that we could assist her as an agency is if she delivered in Ohio, giving you these tools in order to find an ethical agency in your state. And we are a Christian agency, so we're only going to advocate for Christian agencies for you guys as well. So I do have a PowerPoint, but honestly, I prefer to just talk. I think it's so much more personal to see my face, for me to see your face. So we're just gonna dig in that way, and I'm just gonna go off my PowerPoint notes that I have here, but let's go. So I just want to start by edifying you women that it's hard to talk about adoption. And in this culture, we have parenting all around us. We ourselves were parented, perhaps some of us are parents, but we have that base knowledge. So when you're talking to someone about adoption and you don't have that specific knowledge when it comes to especially the biological families, it's really hard to pour into these men and women when we don't have the confidence like we do when it comes to parenting. So it's awesome that you're here today. I am so honored to be able to share this information with you, and always, even myself, I think it's so important that we all seek constant knowledge, that we're staying up to date on this so that we can love these men and women well. So I wanted to talk about personal biases versus cultural biases. So personal biases are going to be things that are in our schema being our view of the world, to put it very generically. So if we have someone that has CPS in their background, a lot of women are thinking that adoption and foster care are the same thing. So understanding that that might be her viewpoint, her personal bias, we want to make sure that we pour into that to make sure that she knows that foster care and adoption are totally different. Foster care, you don't choose the family. Foster care, your child could be moved to another family. Foster care, typically, with the state of Ohio, I would assume it would be very similar with Virginia. They don't advocate for openness in foster care. It's if you are relinquishing your rights and somebody's adopting your child through foster care, the state is not on board with keeping that relationship open. Whereas adoption nowadays, when you're working with an ethical agency, extremely important, you are going to be able to continue on with that relationship as a biological parent with your child. And openness is on a continuum from just biological parents viewing profiles of potential adoptive parents. That's considered open in states. Where there's the other far end of the continuum, I know some adoptive families who have sleepovers with their children's biological parents. They have that constant relationship. And those are both very big extremes, and there's tons of middle ground there. But open adoption allows biological families to still be involved, not as a parental, an acting parental unit, but as a parent who loves their child and not co-parenting. TPR, that's a common terminology in adoption, and that means termination of parental rights. So a cultural bias would be once a biological parent signs a TPR, that also means that they lose that relationship. Whereas open adoption with an ethical agency, they don't view adoption as a loss of that relationship, but a continuation of that relationship in a different manner. And again, we'll talk later about what an ethical agency looks and acts like, and the kind of questions that you should be asking agencies in order to kind of vet them through to find out if they are in line with this ethical viewpoint. Excuse me. Another cultural bias is that birth parent and bad parent are synonyms, and that is the farthest thing from the truth. And in order to help paint this picture, I want to tell a little bit of my story. And in order to justly tell my story, I have to go back to my father's childhood. So bear with me, it's all relevant, I promise. So my dad grew up in a home that had very rigid gender roles. Nothing wrong with gender roles. I have them in my family too, but where the issue is that my grandma was the breadwinner. My grandma was the nurturer and my grandfather was the breadwinner. And there was absolutely no overlap of those gender roles. So my dad grew up with a father who did not hug. He did not say, I love you. He didn't, nothing that had to do with emotions with his children, because he viewed it as he needs to be a solid breadwinner and all the nurturing happens from his wife. He doesn't need to do any of that. Plus, he was very uncomfortable in doing that. So my dad grew up in this, seeing this is how men act. Men don't show emotions. Men don't hug. Men don't say, I love you. That's not masculine, which is the farthest thing from the truth. So my dad grew up and brought that viewpoint into his own family. And I'm not sure if you ladies are familiar with the Enneagram or not, but I am an Enneagram 2. Basically what that means in super layman's terms is I am a very emotionally driven person, and I very deeply connect with the emotions of others. So if somebody's upset, they don't have to tell me, I can feel it. So I grew up in this environment of where my dad didn't know how to emotionally pour into me, but I needed that. And being a child, it's so hard to articulate what you think, feel, and desire. It mostly comes out in behavior, right? So I would try to tell my dad what I needed from him, and he wouldn't understand. He wouldn't want to hear it. So my dad took his upbringing and just to the 10th power exploded it to where he was often gone on business trips. And he was an excellent provider. But when he would come home, he would be so stressed out from that business trip that he had no emotional capacity for his family. You know, the saying that your job gets the best of you and your family gets the rest of you, that's very much the environment that I grew up in. So my dad didn't have the capacity for the loudness of children or the touchy-feeliness of children. So I grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me because my dad was capable of being this loving, charismatic, funny man with coworkers and with other family members and with friends, just not with me. And again, if you don't know anything about the Enneagram, I'm not going to go into super detail about this, but my dad is a 1. 1s are the perfectionists, And when they're in stress versus in health, they want to make things perfect either way. But when they're in stress, they tend to fixate on people or things to make them perfect. Unfortunately for me, my dad fixated on me as a child. So he was always quick to correct any sort of behavior that he saw as not feminine. So if I was loud, I'd get yelled at. If I was funny, he wouldn't laugh, he'd be sober. But if my brother told a joke, he was quick to pour into that. So again, I'm growing up thinking that I'm unworthy, I'm unlikable, what's wrong with me? And I'm trying to tell my dad, you're hurting my feelings. I need you to love me in this way. Again, being a child, it's hard to articulate these things. And him being a man that was taught that men don't show emotions, men don't speak about emotions. We were constantly on two different paths. My dad would tell me all the time, you're too sensitive. And he would put up this invisible wall between the two of us. Eventually, when I became a teenager, I got tired of knocking on a wall that would never come down, that he would not sit with me and listen and try to love me well. And so I turned to the world to find my worth and my identity because I wasn't finding it at home. And unfortunately, the world says to young girls, your worth is in your sexuality. And it felt so good to finally be seen and heard and valued. And so I dove in head first into this cultural ick. Now, I don't blame my dad. I made these decisions on my own, but I want you to see how the one chapter of me finding out that I'm pregnant was not my entire novel. I was a hurting person, not a bad person. I needed validation. I needed health in the most important relationship of a woman's life. I tried to get that and I couldn't. And so I did what I could to cope. And unfortunately for me, coping was sex, was getting a man to show me that he loves me, which authentically the man that I chose did not love me. Because when I found out I was pregnant, he told me that I'm being selfish to him and his mother for not aborting the child. And when I did not comply with his attempted manipulation, he left. So here I am, 16, pregnant, this really hard, unhealthy relationship with my father. And then the father of my child abandons me. That was really, really hard. Oh my goodness. And again, through all of this, it wasn't that I was bad, it was that I was hurting. So when these women come into your office and their lives are so far-fetched and they're making these decisions that you're like, oh my goodness, why would you even think of doing that? It's not that they're bad people, and not that I think that you think they're bad people, but I just want to pour into this that they're hurting and they need someone to validate their inherent worth as daughters of a king. It's really, really hard to understand that a God you cannot see loves you, cares about you, and wants to have a relationship with you when your earthly father is showing you the complete opposite of that. And so when these women and men come into our office, treating them with respect and dignity and kindness, not only with our words, but with our body language. Don't pull back from that when they say something that might be shocking. Stay engaged. Don't let your shock show on your face for the coping mechanism that they're using at that time. Keep your face soft and kind and empathetic. Because these women are men are coming in and they're reading their environment. They have it pretty well established in their mind. I'm unworthy, I'm unlikable, I'm unlovable, prove it to me. I'm looking at you, waiting for you to reiterate, to mirror to me what I already think. So many of these women, and myself included during that time of my life, are hyper aware of how others are treating us. So it's very important that we're intentional, not just with our words, but with our body language and our facial expressions. But with all of that said, I do want to pour into that you ladies are planting a seed. You are doing God's work, but ultimately God is in control. So if this woman does not choose life and this woman does not choose to parent or adoption, that is not on you. That is on her. And you planting that seed could bring beautiful fireweeds later on in her life. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this flower, but fireweed is the first plant that comes after the devastation of a forest fire. It is quite literally a tangible example of Isaiah 61:3 that talks about beauty from ashes. That's what God wants to give us. He wants to give us a spirit of praise instead of a spirit of despair. He wants to make us oaks of righteousness. And he wants to do all of this so that we can be a display of his splendor. So take heart, ladies, if women do not follow through with life, that is not on you. So what is on us is 1 Peter 4:10. God calls us to be good stewards of his grace and to use all of our talents in order to be a good steward. And I fully believe that you ladies are doing God's work and you are being good stewards of his grace by showing up and loving these men and women well. And truly, I believe that empathy without evidence is grace. So we don't have to hear every individual story that comes into the office in order to give them that grace. You don't have to know their whole backstory to know that they aren't bad, but they're hurting. So when we take those labels off bad and replace them with valuable, worthy, hurting, it completely changes our perspective and helps us to talk with these men and women like they are the kings princes and princesses of God's kingdom, because God loves them. You will never, ever come in contact with somebody who God does not love, ever, yourself included. So if you ladies want to know more about the Enneagram, it is so, so helpful when it comes to human relationships, learning how we function in health and in stress and how others do the same. The Road Back to You by Anne Morgan Crome and Susan Stable is an excellent book that does the laying of the foundation of what the Enneagram is. And then learning more about interacting with people, being able to read them more easily and interact with them. The next book that I would suggest is by Susan Stable, and it's called The Paths Between Us. Excellent, excellent resources. And for me in my life, God used these tools in order to help bring my relationship with my Father to health. Before I move on, I want to make sure that I don't leave a sour taste in your mouth about my Father, because he is a man of integrity. He is a very loving and kind man, and I am one of the few women, sorry, I'm probably going to cry over this, who got to hear in her adult years her father apologized to her about how he chose to treat her. So my dad is a very loving and kind man. Okay, that's enough of that. So now I'm going to go into more of the policies part of adoption now that we've gone into the deep emotional part of it. So I'm going to be speaking on Ohio law again. And we're going to start off with the hopeful adoptive parents. So before anyone can ever make a profile book, which is what the biological families would look at in order to choose who they want to parent their child, the adoptive family would have to have what's called a home study. In all honesty, home studies are very intrusive, very, very personal, to the point of finances. You have to lay out all your finances. Can you afford to take on a child? You have to have medical documentation showing that you're healthy enough to take on a child. You have to have character references. When you work with a Christian adoption agency, you're going to have pastoral references. There's going to be, outside of the home study, a next step would be Well, let me back up just for a second. When they're doing the home study, yes, it's about the individuals and making sure that those individual parents are healthy and capable of parenting. But even the home check is very rigorous. If they have well water, that has to be tested to make sure it's healthy, just to give you an idea of how very detailed this home study is. So these people that are coming to the point of they want to adopt, they're doing so, and they're going through quite a bit in order to make that happen. So it's not just Tom, Dick, and Harry, Joe, Jane, and Jessica off the streets. These are people who are very intentional, very motivated in order to adopt, and very vetted through the system. So character references, we touched on that, and then adoption training. So we'll touch a little bit more on this farther along the way, but most states don't have a whole lot of information on to be taught to the hopeful adoptive parents on open adoption. So it's so important that we're working with an ethical agency that's teaching above and beyond the state requirement for training. Like Spirit of Faith Adoptions. I speak once a month. I'm speaking tonight. In fact, if you ladies wanted to hop on to the Zoom through Spirit of Faith Adoptions, it's completely free. I share my story, an adoptive couple who's already taken placement through Spirit of Faith shares their story, because truly a lot of adoptive families come into adoption thinking that biological families have 7 arms and 15 eyes and are these scary beasts to be aware of. But when we have a biological mom sit in front of them and express her deep, deep love for her child, and they realize, you know, these aren't scary people. These are mothers with this innate drive to love and protect their children. That helps break down those biases so that open adoption, healthy open adoption, can be fostered. That's not a requirement, at least through the state of Ohio, that you have to talk to a biological family before you can take placement, which is just wild to me as an adoption assessor and also as a biological parent who placed for adoption. So there's that. So after placement is when you adopt a child. It's not the official adoption, but when you say, yes, I'm taking this child in. After placement, you have 6 months as an adoptive family where a licensed social worker comes into their home to make sure that the home is still safe, like a little mini safety check. And they make sure that the child is happy, healthy, and thriving, and the family is doing well. So that happens at 1 week, 1 month, 2 months, and all the way through bare minimum 6 months, but it all depends on the court date. It can be anywhere between 6 to 8 months. COVID kind of threw a wrench in that. Sometimes it's longer. It just all depends on when the family can get into court. So a child's not officially adopted until that court date. That is called finalization. When the child takes on that family's last name, the adoption agency backs out, and they are the parent at that point. Now, what I'm talking about here is custodial adoption. So what that would mean for Spirit of Faith Adoptions is that we are the legal guardians of the child, but we place the child into the home of the adoptive family and give them guardianship until that 6 to 8 months when they finalize and that child becomes officially a part of their family. That's done to protect children. In all my years and all the years of Spirit of Faith, a child has never been removed because they weren't safe, happy, and loved. Ever, ever, ever. I've never heard of it elsewhere. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. But again, it's so important to go with an ethical agency that's pre-training families before they ever step foot to a computer to make their profile books for biological families to see. So now we're going to flip sides and go to the adoption process on the biological family side so that you can have this knowledge base in order to talk to these women. So they have confidence in knowing, 1, it's not foster care, and 2, it's not just anyone off the streets, and 3, what do they get from this? So when a biological mom and dad come to Spirit of Faith Adoptions, the first thing that we do is an intake. We get to know who they are, why they want a place for adoption, because if it's only financial reasons and nothing else, there is an awesome website that I encourage you ladies to write down. It's findhelp.org. All they have to do is type in their zip code and it links them with every single local to them, state and federal resource. This is not an Ohio website. This is a nationwide website. So this can link them with rental help, groceries, medical, just financial period help. It's just a plethora of information for them to tap into. Now, this is social welfare, so they would have to qualify through low income. But any of the mamas that are coming in, if they have Medicaid, they should automatically qualify pretty easily for the other stuff. So that's a website that not a whole lot of people know. So tell all your friends. It is such a blessing of a resource. And we help these women walk through why they want to place, because we want to make sure that they're making this decision not out of fear, but out of full knowledge. And we want them to be comfortable with this decision and not just a rash, quick decision. So one of the ways that we help them make this decision without it being a rash, oh my word, I got to do something. Okay, I'll do this. We don't match. And matching is when a biological family and an adoptive family say, yes, we do want to take on this placement. And yes, I do want to place my child with them. That's not legally binding. It's just the acknowledgement of that relationship, which opens up the door to resources available to these mamas if they're not matched. So we don't let matching occur until 20 weeks. We believe women before that need time to process, oh my word, I'm pregnant. What am I going to do? So that protects them. And then on the flip side of it, it also protects the adoptive families. So once they're matched with somebody, they're taken out of the matching program. They cannot match with anybody else. So we don't want them off the matching program for an extended amount of time if this mama is not even sure that she wants to place for adoption. Because that can be a huge roller coaster for these hopeful parents to be following along with this mama from the start of pregnancy to the end, when she can very easily change her mind. And truly she can after 20 months, or excuse me, 20 weeks. Oh, that'd be terrible if pregnancies were 20 months. Can you imagine? After 20 weeks. So we just want to be very empathetic and as ethical as we can be for all sides that are included in an adoption. Again, this is going to be what an ethical adoption agency is going to look and act like. So we'll get there more in depth in just a little bit. So after the initial intake for the biological family, the next meeting that we would have is the social and medical history. This is exactly what it sounds like. So when a woman wants to place for adoption, we want to know a little bit more about what this baby could potentially be like. For example, let's name her Jane. Let's say Jane has schizophrenia in her family. Her mother's schizophrenic. So when she's done all this social and medical history, we send it on to our head social worker, who looks at all the adoptive families, and the adoptive families click, yes, I will consider schizophrenia, or no, I won't consider schizophrenia. And that's all to do with what can they personally handle and what can they geographically handle. So we're not going to send a baby out to rural West Virginia where they have no access to any sort of mental health care, because that's not beneficial to this child. So we're trying to also be protective of this potential adoptee. What is the best placement for this child? So the head social worker will then give the coordinator, the assessor, all the profiles that would be a best match with what this child may potentially be. And then from there, the biological families get to look at all these profiles. If they have a connection with a couple of them, they can meet with them to interview them if they'd like to, and then ultimately match or decide not to place for adoption or go to another agency. what have you. So during these initial meetings of the biological family and the potential adoptive family, the best way I can describe them is they're like a blind date. You want to put your best foot forward, but you also want to be authentic. It's really nerve-wracking, but through that whole process, the biological family has their very own assessor working with them that will be there the entire time. They will never meet an adoptive family without them. They will never be left to have awkward silence or uncomfortableness. As you can tell, I'm chatty. So we have people on staff who love to talk and love people. So it's never a matter of, oh my word, this is going to be really awkward, because I have yet to go into an awkward meeting. In fact, I just had a meeting recently where they met for the very first time and they decided to go fishing together. And it was so beautiful, and just peace surrounded us. It was amazing. Anyways, I digress. So after they do the social and medical history, we also have to do what's called laws and materials. Again, you'll be able to find all of this information on your JFS equivalent in West Virginia, Jobs and Family Services. So what this is documentation that they have to sign saying, I understand what adoption is. I understand that once I do sign after baby's born, in Ohio, it's 72 hours after birth is the earliest that TPR can take place. And remember, TPR is termination of parental rights. So what they're signing in these laws and materials is just acknowledging that they understand all of what's going on. Nobody's forcing them. No one's coercing them. They don't feel fear or any of that kind of stuff around making this choice. And that is a state form, not an agency form. So all of Ohio has to do that. West Virginia, I would assume that there's some sort of equivalent to that. And then they also get a pamphlet that explains their different options. They can choose to place for adoption with a family or friend. They can place for adoption with somebody they just met, like with an agency or an attorney, or parent, and that kind of stuff. It does not mention abortion in there. It's all about the parenting options in that state pamphlet. Again, this is Ohio. I'm not really familiar with West Virginia and what they would show to clients. And then there is what is called the Putative Father Registry. So what this is dad's not involved. For the state of Ohio, the way that they have the law written up is if he has relations with a woman, it is his responsibility to go to her and say, hey, we were together. It's been 9 months. Was a kid born? It's not the woman's responsibility to go to him and say, hey, you fathered a child. So we are very intentional about trying to get dads involved. That's not always the case. Sometimes women don't know who the dad is. Or sometimes, unfortunately, women were attacked. And so we're not going to force her to bring the attacker back into the picture and get his permission for her to place for adoption. If at all possible, though, we want dad to be involved so that he can also sign off on an adoption and for the child as well, so that child can have access to his social and medical history, because all of that history gets put into the child's file, so they can have access to that. And we think it's so important to advocate for this future Earthside being while they're still in the womb. Not all agencies view it that way, but we think that's so important to advocate for every single member of the adoption triad. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this terminology before, but it's a triangle. The bottom two corners are going to be the parental triangles, the adoptive parents, the biological parents or birth parents, and then the top is the adoptee. And I think it's a really cool representation of the two parental units working together, not parenting together, but working together to raise this adoptee up. So in the state of Ohio, Putative Father Registry. So 15 days after birth, the Putative Father Registry is ran. So a potential dad could hop onto the state website and say, hey, I fathered a child, or I maybe fathered a child. I want to have say in what happens with this child. If we run this database and a name comes back, then we need to have this dad have his say in what's going on. At that point, post-birth, there'd be a paternity test to verify that he is dad, but during birth, or excuse me, during in utero, obviously we can't have a paternity at that point. So that is not done until after birth. Typically, nothing comes back. I've heard of something come back maybe once or twice in Spirit of Faith history. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it's not very often, unfortunately. My story of being abandoned by the biological father is not atypical. And then another law in Ohio is the hopeful adoptive parents or potential adoptive parents do need to give money to go towards living expenses of the biological mom. This is not for the family unit. This is only for the mom. So in Ohio, it's $3,000 that would go to help her pay for rent, help her pay for a new car or gas or upkeep on her car, her cell phone, anything that she needs in order to live. It could be for Ubers to the doctor's office, any of that kind of stuff, maternity clothes, food. So the way that Spirit of Faith Adoptions breaks that payment up is it's $1,500 before birth and $1,500 after birth. Again, we're thinking about both sides here. We don't want a biological family to spend the full $3,000 and say, gee whiz, I just spent all of their money. Now I have to place with them. We don't ever want them to feel any sort of coercion. So we break it in half so that they don't, we can help to prevent that feeling. And also with our words, pour into that to make sure that they know you are the parents, you have control. If you want to change your mind, tell me. We'll be the bad guys. We'll tell everyone and you don't have to worry about it. And the other side of it, which is pretty obvious, we don't want them spending all that $3,000 and then that family, that hopeful adoptive family, being out all of that money. So in order to protect both sides, that's how we break it up. That's going to vary agency to agency, but the $3,000 total is across the board in the state of Ohio. You guys are going to also have living expenses. I'm not sure exactly how much your state allots, but it's going to be a very similar amount. So again, I'm not sure about West Virginia, but in Ohio, openness after an adoption takes place is a gentleman's agreement. So what that means is there's not going to be a legally binding contract that says the adoptive family has to follow through with what they have promised. So again, this goes right back into you have to work with an ethical agency who's training their families beyond the state minimum so that they understand the importance of open adoption. And following through with what you promise and not promising more than what you are capable of following through with. This is, again, beneficial to every single member in the triad. The little bit less obvious one would be why it would benefit the adoptive parents to have the biological family involved. And that would be one of the reasons would go back to the social and medical history. When we take that social and medical history from the biological family or mom, whatever the case may be, that's all self-report. So you have this woman sitting in this huge decision. She's not necessarily able to think of all the minute medical information of her mom, her dad, her grandma, her grandpa, her brothers or sisters. You're going to have missing information. So if you have access to the source, like let's say little Johnny's showing pre-diabetic stuff, little adoptee Johnny's showing this, where is this coming from? You can go back to his biological mom and say, hey, little Johnny's showing this, this, and this. Do you have any of that in your family history? And she can be like, oh my word, yeah, actually, my brother had that. I forgot about that. And then they can take that information back to the doctors to help this little guy out. To have access to that is invaluable for parents. And furthermore, when you have someone who is just as excited that Johnny said his first babble or Johnny rolled over, that's immaculate to have another mom and or dad there to cheer on this little guy to the same extent that you are. That is such a gift. A hard earned, not always easy, just like any other relationship, but so worth the time and effort to have that relationship. And then obviously for the biological parents, it's such a blessing to be able to see that our children are safe, they're happy, they're loved. I unfortunately have a closed adoption. Back when I placed, semi-open meant that you got pictures and letters and there was a timestamp on that. That was just across the board what they did. It was very uncommon for there to be fully open adoptions where you had contact throughout that time. So I got pictures and letter updates for 2 years of my daughter's life, and then it stopped after that. I don't know if my kid's okay. I have to be prayerful and just believe that God is taking care of her. Something that I didn't share in my story, but I think is so cool. So I'm going to go ahead and share it now if I have time. I'll go quick because this needs to be said. I feel that I need to say this. When I was in the hospital room, I asked Annie to be in there with me. Annie's not her real name. In order to protect her privacy, I'm changing her name up. My chosen adoptive parent of my child. I asked her to be in the delivery room with me. She wasn't able to have biological children, and so I wanted to take some of the sting of infertility off of her. Not that I had that power at all, but that's just how much I authentically loved her. I wanted her to experience birth, even if it was secondhand. So when she was in there with me, again, because I love her so much and I don't want her to feel any ill feelings, I did not tell her that I had named my daughter many months prior. Again, this is not my daughter's real name in order to protect her privacy, but the story of this is absolutely true. I had named her Siri many months prior. I did not tell my adoption agency. I did not tell the potential adoptive parents. I didn't want them to feel like they had to use the name or feel guilt over not using the name. I wanted them to have that no strings attached blessing to be able to name their child. And so when my daughter came out and she got the clean bill of health from the APGAR scale and all that kind of stuff, and the nurse brought her over and laid her in my chest, and Annie didn't overcrowd me or make me feel like I couldn't have forever with this child. But when I got my sufficient amount of snuggles, and I handed her over to Annie and I said, "What are you going to name her?" And she told me Iris, which is Siri perfectly backwards. And it was in that moment that I felt God saying, "This is meant to be. You don't need to worry. I have ordained this all. And here is your motherhoods perfectly mirroring each other in your child's name." So that time of chaos, there was so much peace in that. And even to this day, I don't know if my child's okay, but there's still that peace there, a peace that I don't know how to articulate with words, but it exists. So God is cool. God is really awesome. Beauty from ashes all the way. Back to biological parents. They don't pay for any of the medical bills when they do place for adoption. That's during pregnancy, during delivery. They don't pay for any of the minor's bills, minor being baby. Minor's how the state talks about them in legal paperwork. So they have no fees for that. They don't pay for any of the coordination. Everything that I do, they don't pay for that. The hopeful adoptive parents are going to pay for all of that. Typically, women that we work with do have Medicaid. So the state is going to pay for the majority of that. So the hopeful adoptive families don't have a whole lot of medical bills. I'm sorry, there's, as my son calls them, woo-woos going past the house. And so there's no fees for placing for adoption. If they do decide that they want to parent, they don't pay for the fees that they have incurred or that were incurred during my time working with her, but she would take on the medical bills at that point. So now we're going to talk about what does an ethical agency look like. So let's say you aren't able to work with Spirit of Faith because the mama that you're working with is not delivering in Ohio. That's the only way that we would be able to work with her, because we're not licensed as an agency in West Virginia. We're only licensed in Ohio. So when you call up to an adoption agency, some things that I would ask, I want to make sure I get this right, so excuse me while I read this. Does the agency have a promised placement time? I don't want you to be decisive. I don't want you to be sneaky. There we go. My brain doesn't want to wrap around that word. I don't want you to be sneaky, but I also don't want you to tell who you are. Just call and say you're interested in adoption. Because that way you're going to get more of an authentic answer than if you say, oh, I'm a pregnancy center, tell me about your policies. Because they're going to tailor their policies to who they're talking to, potentially if they're an unethical agency. So in order to set yourself up for more authentic responses from these agencies, just tell them you're interested in adoption, not that you are with the pregnancy center. If they're promising quick placement times for adoptive families, right off the bat, that's a red flag. To me, that's saying we're coercing moms into placing for adoption so that we can make a profit. That's another thing that you need to look out for. Are the agencies for profit or are they nonprofit? You're typically going to want to go with a nonprofit agency. I would not advocate for a for-profit agency. Let's see here. Something that we talked about previously. What are they teaching to the hopeful adoptive families? Are they only doing the state mandated? What kind of teachings do they have on open adoption? Are they required to, these families, are they required to talk to a biological mom or dad who has placed for adoption? Let's see. Another thing to look out for is their fee schedule for the adoptive family. This is not a deal breaker. I just think that it's more ethical for an adoption agency to charge adoptive families what's happening when it's happening, not a gigantic lump sum at the beginning, because some of those, what if that fee is going towards doesn't even happen. So if like Spirit of Faith only charges, like let's say you have a meeting with a biological family, an assessor is going to come, is going to help instigate that relationship, make sure that the conversation is always flowing, everyone feels comfortable. They shouldn't be paying for that up front if that never happens, because you could have a biological family that says, I like these people in this profile, I choose them, and then that meeting never happens. So to pay for that and that doesn't even happen, to me, that's unethical. To Spirit of Faith adoptions, that's unethical. So what's their fee? That one you typically don't even have to call an agency for. You can just see their fee schedule online. Same thing for Spirit of Faith adoptions. Just type in fee schedule on the search bar. You'll be able to find it. Again, that's not the end all be all. That's just one of those things to look out for. If all of these red flags are adding up to a great big banner of this isn't right, steer clear. Another thing, if you are looking for an authentic Christ following agency, and it's unfortunate that I have to say that versus Christian, but there are so many agencies out there that claim to be Christian, but they are not following biblical principles when it comes to marriage. Are they Christ following in how they're set up? Spirit of Faith adoptions, we tell anyone who asks, our biological moms are looking and dads are looking for a mom and a dad in a healthy marriage to place their child into. And that is what I have for ethical agency. So let's put our knowledge into practice. When we're talking to a client, we want to learn their biases. If we are saying, excuse excuse me. Have you ever considered placing for adoption? That is not an open-ended question. That is either going to be yes, no, or I could never. You're not going to hear any of her backstory in that, so you won't be able to take the conversation farther very easily. If no worries, if you start the conversation like that to begin with, you can back it up and say, well, can you tell me a little bit more about why you think or feel that way? Or can you tell me what brought you to that conclusion? And say it empathetically, stay engaged with her with your body language, stay soft and kind on your face. Try to not bring judgment to your face. A better starter would be, can you tell me what you know about adoption? Because that's not putting anything on her to make that choice in that moment, but that's just getting her knowledge base and kind of understanding where are her biases coming from, or is she fully aware of what modern open adoption is? That will help you better serve your client and know where you need to speak from. Let's see here. So Ashley Mitchell is another birth mom. I don't know if you've ever heard of her before, but I love this quote from her. And it says, how am I going to trust that you're going to serve me if I think my agenda doesn't fit yours? So I think that's a good picture of where many women have a mindset today. So you and I are pro-life. To us, adoption and abortion are opposites. So don't abort, place your child for adoption. That's not how many women think today. Women have compartmentalized parenting choices and pregnancy choices. So talking to a woman who is abortion vulnerable solely about adoption and treating it like this is the end all be all, this is, you're saved. She's not going to be able to be in that same mindset as you. Dr. Jennifer Dougler, she is a marriage and family therapist. And I first saw Flipping Your Lid from her, which I think is such a great tangible example of what many of these women are going through. So if you hold up your fist and put your thumb on your palm and wrap your fingers around, this is going to represent your brain. So here's your brain stem, here's your prefrontal cortex. This part of your brain is like the adulty part of your brain, very layman's terms here. So that has to do with pre-planning, reasoning, adulting stuff. Inside your brain, your thumb here is going to be your emotional part of your brain, your hippocampus, your limbic system, your amygdala, all that kind of good stuff. So when you are in a state of being triggered, fight, flight, freeze, and there's a new one called fawn, we won't go into that, but when that happens, when that trigger happens, Dr. Jennifer Dougler says that you flip your lid. So your adulty part of your brain, the planning, reasoning, all of that goes offline and you're running purely on emotions. Very unempathetically, I don't like how she terms this, but she says you have a brain of a dog at this point because you're just emotions. That's all you are. So our job as those who are helping women make a choice is to help them bring that back online so that they can make the best healthy choice for them and their children. The way about doing that is not saying adoption, adoption, adoption in order to get them to back off from abortion. The pro-life choice typically follows when we help women tackle the hurdles that are in front of them. So when we have a woman who is afraid to tell a significant person in their life that they're pregnant, I can sit with you. I can be there with you. Help take that fear away so that she can process. I don't know how I'm going to take care of a kid. I don't have the finances. Have you ever heard of findhelp.org? Let's sit down and go through this and let's apply for everything that you could apply for. Let's get rid of this hurdle. Let's get rid of this concern or fear for you. I'm here with you every step of the way. You're not alone. That's huge when we sit across from these women and say, you know what, I don't just care about your baby. I wildly, passionately, uncautiously care about you. Let's make you okay so that you can make the best decision for your baby. When women hear that and see that, that is such a game changer. And it's, yes, we need to talk about adoption with these ladies so that they have the full picture of what's going on, but they're not going to hear us talk about adoption when they're fearful about how am I even going to find a place to live? How am I going to get gas in my car? How am I going to get groceries? They can't think about the future when they're stuck in the current of, oh my word, what am I going to do? So yes, we are Christ followers. Yes, we are like-minded to him, but we need to think, how would these women think? How can I best serve them where they are versus where I am? Go to them, don't make them come to us, because they've already come to our agency. Let's go the rest of the way without being coercive, without chasing after them. Because again, you are not in charge, God is. You're the seed bearers, not the waterers and sunshine and all that kind of good stuff. So I am going to put up something really quick so that you ladies can either take a picture of it or you can write it down, but it's just a bunch of resources that I have for you. 1 second, please. And then when I'm finished with this part, the rest of the meeting is going to be for you ladies to ask me questions. Let me make that big. Sorry. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. I am an open book, pun intended. I have written about all of this and much, much more. So any questions that you might have, you're not going to offend me, please ask. Any policy questions, I will answer to the best of my ability. But again, if you have something that's really specific to West Virginia, I can't reiterate enough, your JFS equivalent is going to have all of this information for you. It's just, the way that my brain functions is that if I don't feel confident in what I'm about to talk about, I'm not going to be able to talk well with who's in front of me. So knowing all this background information helps me to feel that confidence to, when I get pushback, I can very lovingly and kindly give pushback without being coercive. So the website that I mentioned before, findhelp.org, you just place the client zip code in there and it links every single known local, state, and federal resource. sitneedaknee.com, that is Ashley Mitchell's website. This is very secular, but it does have some good information. This is not something that I would hand off to a client, but something to just kind of help your knowledge base of what non-Christian women coming in for help might be thinking. On Facebook, there's Caring for Birth Mothers, which is a private Facebook group for any women who have placed. So they know that they have that resource. Birth Mothers Rock would be the same thing, and Birth and Adoptive Mothers United. So that's literally what it says, is a private group for birth and adoptive mothers to come together and learn from each other and love each other. Instagram, Fireweed613, that is my Instagram. The Grace Bond, that's another good one, and Talk About Adoption. All three of those are ran by Christian, Christ-following women. Retreats for women who have placed for adoption. Fireweed Retreat, that's a retreat that I have founded. Everything that I do is Christ-centered. I believe if Jesus isn't in what you're doing, then why are you doing it? So we actually just filled up our last spot for the retreat yesterday. So that's no longer available this year, but that will be yearly. Caring for Birth Mothers, they have a retreat every year. That one is secular. but it's ran by Christian women, but they don't go into the Christian part of it. But that's for any women who might kind of have a sour taste in their mouth about God and not comfortable with coming to a fully engrossed in God retreat, but ran by good Christian women who are not going to share principles outside of what they believe, but not that fireweed shoves Jesus down their throats. Don't want to at all depict that. We are just, our clientele are more of the established Christians, while we do have some who are just searching, dipping their feet in the waters, if you will. So I am pretty good on time. Do you ladies have any questions for me? There is a chat option if you move your mouse around on the bottom, and you can choose. Let me pull this up so I can see. A little box will pop up and it says to everyone, or you can drop it down and you can find Spirit of Faith Adoptions in there and just send me that directly. That way I can answer your question if it's a little bit more private and you don't want the whole room to know what you're asking or know who's asking. But you can go ahead and turn off your mutes and feel free to ask questions. If you can't think of any, I can certainly think of some that have been asked of me a few times.
I wanted to ask, you were talking about the $1,500 that the family pays before the birth and then $1,500 afterwards, but the mom still has the choice or the option of not going through with that particular family. Mm-hmm. Is that adoptive family just out the $1,500? Is that just a risk that they incur when they embark on this process, that they take a chance that the birth mom will choose somebody else or back out of the whole process and then that $1,500 is gone, or what happens there?
Yeah, so the way that the law, that's a great question. The way that the law is laid out in Ohio is that that's mandated. They have to pay that up front. And then Spirit of Faith Adoptions takes it $1,500 before and $1,500 after birth. Okay. We do that in order to protect both sides so that the hopeful adoptive family isn't out all of that money, and the biological family has not spent all of that money and feel like they have to place. Okay. The way that we talk to our families is, this is a law, this is enforced, but this could also be what this mom needed in order to choose life. Mm. So it's hard when that happens. I've never adopted myself, but I have heard that when a placement falls through, when a mom decides to parent, or I have never heard of them choosing another family after they've decided to match. But if that did happen, it's very similar to a miscarriage. There's that grief process, and it's very disenfranchised. This world does not understand that grief, just like biological parents. Our grief is very disenfranchised as well, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, we take the steps that we can in order to protect the families financially, but also it's state law that when they're matched, that money does go to that mom, not mom and dad, just the mom. So like biological dad's not going to get his cell phone paid for, but if he's living with mom in the same apartment, he's benefiting from that too. But yeah, it's state law. West Virginia is $3,000 is usually what it is across the board. There are some states that are a little bit more. I don't remember if there's any that are less, but you're going to be right around then, and I'm assuming the exact same laws of it must be paid, but how it's paid is not specified.
Another question on the Punitive Father Registry, is that based on where the baby is born, or is that based on the residency of the parents?
So
since we're a border state,
right,
we have that crossover all the time.
I'm not super sure about that because we've never had a placement with West Virginia before. So we've never been through that process. I do know that we would need to be in contact with the state of Virginia throughout the entire process. Each state has, I don't remember what it's called, but for all intents and purposes, it's to protect children from being trafficked. So they're going to want to verify our agency to make sure that we're not stealing children from their state.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not really sure on that. I don't know that there's any information on JFS about that, but that would be more of a talking to someone directly.
'Cause I'm wondering, if there was a mom here who was in a bad situation, if West Virginia doesn't have that particular registry or something similar to it, which I don't think we do, could the mom go over to Marietta, have the baby, and then follow Ohio's law, even though she's maybe a West Virginia resident and he's a West Virginia resident? Could she go there and then the dad would have to go to that registry to have a say? You see what I'm saying? So I'm just wondering how the moms, if it can be manipulated or what just the actual rule is on who's on the register. How do you get on that?
I'm not positive, but my inkling would be, because we are only registered in Ohio to practice, that we would go by Ohio law, because we can work with women from West Virginia. They just have to deliver in Ohio.
Okay.
So my gut reaction would be we would follow Ohio law while remaining in contact with West Virginia in order for us to practice. Because if we're following West Virginia law only and not Ohio, that might be a little sticky. Again, we've never done one of these before. So I would have to go through the process in order to adequately answer that, because I'm not sure where that information would be without directly calling someone at the state and having them educate on that.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we had a West Virginia mom who delivered in Ohio, would the Ohio couple be willing to pay for her medical expenses because her medical card wouldn't cover her in Ohio?
I'm pretty sure that her Medicaid, would cover that
In Ohio, even though she's a West Virginia resident.
That would be something that she would have to check with her Medicaid, but I'm pretty sure that because you're so close, I don't see why that would be, because I would assume that you would have doctors that practice in hospitals all around that area. But yeah, that would be something that she would have to check with her Medicaid with. Yes, Medicaid. My mind does not want to wrap around to that today. But check with her medical provider on exactly how that would work. Just to reiterate that would be covered.
Okay,
but, yeah,
and any private adoption would be quite different from what you've explained today, correct?
I am talking about private adoption.
Okay.
But
for someone who didn't use an adoptive agency, it would be quite different.
If you didn't use an agency, then you would, I'm not sure how that would work. I know you can use an attorney, but I don't know the laws and how that would look around that. I would assume it would be the same, but I don't know. I know that there's not the coordinator there. I do know that some people find their matches online through social media. That's not atypical nowadays, and not going through an agency or an attorney at all, and then just getting an attorney for the needed areas. But I don't have knowledge based.
Yeah, think of somebody who might want to place with their family.
Yeah, that would be what's considered a targeted adoption. Now for our agency, we are licensed 0 through 2, but it's very, very rare that we place a toddler. We've done it once in the years that I've been where I am at Spirit of Faith. Which another relevant thing, and I didn't tell you guys, is I placed for adoption through Spirit of Faith Adoptions. So I had many years. It's been 17 years since I've placed, and then had such an empathetic experience I wanted to come back and kind of help fine tune that and make open adoption, not just at Spirit of Faith, but across the board, the complete norm. So I think that's relevant.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story. And I think that you've ministered to us, you know, by sharing the agency and by sharing your own story. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for listening. That means a lot, because unfortunately, birth mamas are very stigmatized in this culture. So for you to sit and listen to what I'm saying, it means more than I can express. So thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? I think I saw that we had a man join us. Is he typically working with clients, or is he more in a non client-based role? I think it was Greg.
Oh, that's just.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
Got
just the way we're set up.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
Right.
I was gonna say, for the dads that come to work with you, sometimes it's helpful when we have a man for him to talk to. So finding somebody who is a single dad or who has placed for adoption, been there through the whole process and supported his wife, girlfriend, what have you, is really, really helpful. You don't have to have that resource in order to function as a great agency, but definitely something that I would recommend if you have access to that. And on that same note, if you ever have a woman who's wanting to speak with somebody who has placed for adoption, I'm happy to talk to them. I'm happy to talk to the guys too. Sometimes men don't feel comfortable hearing from women. And I acknowledge that, but I'm happy to speak to whoever would be open to talking to me. So I think, Heather, you might have you have my contact information, so please feel free to share it with the class. Do we have any other questions? We got about 14 more minutes left until lunchtime.
So do you have anything, if a child is already in foster care, that's a whole nother story, right?
Right, we would not step into that. That would not be our agency. Now, we do have some women who CPS is involved and saying to them, once baby's born, baby is going to go into foster care, and then they can choose to work with us, so they can choose who the mom and dad are, so that they can continue on with that relationship versus baby just going into foster care, who knows where.
Right. Yeah. Some moms may not be able to keep their children for legal reasons. And so if that's, I wondered what would happen then if they would have a choice, if they were like, well, I really want to go with this agency, would the state work with you on that? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've had some moms where CPS will come into the hospital to talk to them. I personally contact CPS when I know that that's going to be an issue and say, hey, you need to meet me out in the lobby. We need to talk first. And then I need to go in to talk to my mama before you ever step foot in there, because seeing you and hearing you is going to be terrifying for her. Because even though CPS might be coming in to talk to her, it doesn't mean that CPS taking the baby. Mama's plan is still intact. If she decides to place through Spirit of Faith adoption, CPS will not get involved unless if the case may be that CPS does need to be involved if she chooses to parent, but just to make sure that she feels comfortable and safe and not fearful that people are talking to her that are kind of scary.
Good. I will say I would, if West Virginia doesn't have this now, I know several years ago they didn't. I think that punitive father registry is a great idea personally. I wish we had that here, because we had a situation in our family that really would have helped. So
Yeah.
And then just sign one of these.
glad that we have the laws that we have, but definitely laws need to change.
Mhm.
Like the gentleman's agreement surrounding openness and adoption.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, not every woman has the knowledge base that I have or that you guys have now. And so they go into adoption where adoptive families who aren't working with an ethical agency and they're promising the moon because they want to be parents so bad, and they find out, you know, we really can't handle this kind of openness. And legally, they can just pull back. They don't owe an explanation. They can change phone numbers, they can move, what have you. So it's imperative that these women understand legally what they have the right to, and that the adoptive families are working with an ethical agency that are really pouring into them. Well, why open adoption is imperative.
Jennifer, I switched locations. We were having some trouble with our microphone in the other space. Do you or does Spirit of Faith provide, and I hope you haven't said this, and I'm asking anyways, but more training for those of us that work with patients that come in, that we could, you know, whether it's learning more role playing, just to be able to present, because you shared such great information with us. And then when it gets down to the nitty gritty and we're in appointments with patients for whether it's volunteers, mentors, or us nurses, being able to really broach the subject, as you talked about earlier, just with such empathy and you know, the whole hands and the emotions versus, you know, the flipping of the lid and such. Is there training that Spirit of Faith provides?
So we are a CEU giving agency. I don't know if CEUs would apply to West Virginia, but
Okay.
we do it for nurses here in Ohio. We do it for pregnancy centers. We do it for social workers and for counselors. So yeah, we do a lot of training. It's just a matter of reaching out to us saying, hey, we want this kind of training. And then Stacy Knox, who I believe you've spoken with her. She's the program director. So she's going to know exactly what we have to offer. I'm happy to speak on anything that you need me to speak on. But you would have to go through Stacy to find out exactly what Spirit of Faith is wanting to teach.
Okay, great.
I'm sure.
And then do you refer to any other Christ-centered adoption agencies? We're looking for a second one. We have a couple maybe in our view, but do you, that would help in West Virginia, I think specifically?
So in West Virginia, I'm not really sure. That would be more of a Stacy question because she's more familiar with the other agencies around us. And I'm pretty sure she would be kind of familiar with places in West Virginia.
Okay.
But if she doesn't know any, I would just encourage you to call around to the ones that appear to be Christian agencies and just ask them the questions that I went over. And I can send over my PowerPoint to you so that you can have all that information. You can forward it on to your staff so that they can have all of that in writing.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
not a
then
problem.
one other question that came to my mind towards the end of your talking is your agency are you getting pressure from the current culture and as things are in the United States to go beyond the biblical concept of mom and dad? I guess I didn't ask that very gracefully.
No, that's fine. And I totally understand why you're asking the way that you're asking. I get it. It's a very touchy subject. And the way that Phil, our director, believes is if we are ever pressured, we will close our doors. We will not bend a knee to this culture, and we will follow Christ full-heartedly.
Good. Thank you for answering.
Not a problem. All great questions. So does anyone else have any other questions for me? If not, I have, oh, yes.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to say how much we appreciate you doing this for us. And for me personally, just my sister has adopted. And so I know a little bit about the process. But hearing your story helps me, I think all of us, to, I guess, have a more perspective into our patients. And, you know, you and I think Jenny, another nurse, we've talked, even, I think Janet, a few months back about a couple patients. And so we kind of got to meet you a little bit back. And then you and I have talked again recently about another patient. Those patients didn't do adoption. It's great to have that resource and to have a close contact with you now. I mean, I think I've been calling your cell phone, I realized yesterday. Things, I'm like, oh no. But we really appreciate you and you doing our in-service for us today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here with you ladies and help us all learn. But I pulled this prayer card out of my little stack of prayers, and I just thought it was so appropriate for all of us. So I'm going to go ahead and read this to kind of close us out, and then I will pray if you ladies are okay with that.
Yes.
Great. So this is based on Psalms 32:8, and it says, "The Lord says, I will make you wise and show you where to go. I will guide you and watch over you." And the little tidbit that they have is, I pray that you can visualize yourself and God together, walking together, working together, tackling every challenge together, rejoicing together forever. I just thought that was really cool and very appropriate. So good one, God. So I'm going to go ahead and pray us out before we leave. So, Heavenly Father, I just thank you for every single one of these women here who you have placed upon their hearts to love those who are hurting and those who don't necessarily know who you are and your goodness and your kindness, Lord. I just ask that you give each woman strength to show up every shift, to love these families well. Jesus, I ask that you protect them as they are in the center, and Lord, as they leave, Jesus, not just physically, I ask that you put a spiritual protection over these ladies. And I just pray to thank you, Lord, for each and every one of them. In your name I pray. Amen.
Thank you.
You're so
Thank you.
So,
All right. Have a great day, ladies.
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.
Bye. Not a problem.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.